So my godfather, or my uncle Phil, started talking to me about collective consciousness well before I could probably talk, and most certainly before I could walk, and definitely before I was able to talk back in any intelligent way. Uncle Phil is my mum's older brother, although he often tells people that he's the younger sibling. Um, and for many different reasons, he was often seen as the black sheep of the family. Now, I have always loved Uncle Phil deeply, and I think it's because he spoke about the universe like it was alive and that we're all part of it, and that deeply resonated with me growing up, and it still very much resonates with me today. Um, at the time, like my early childhood, I didn't have the vocabulary for what he was trying to teach me. I kind of just absorbed it in the same way that kids absorb everything, completely without any real filters. And it took me, I want to say, 30 years, maybe a little bit less, maybe 20 years, to find the traditions, the grounding, I guess, that matched what Uncle Phil was planting, the seeds that he had planted in my subconscious. And I found this mostly in China, of all places, many years later. And, I had actually spent a significant amount of time in Japan prior to this, but definitely in China, there is something that deeply, to this very day, resonates with me. Um, I found it at Shaolin, at Ermeshang, so Mount Erme, which is another, very historical site, particularly with Kung Fu roots, and in hundreds of temples and shrines across the mainland that I have visited and prayed in over the years. And I found it in, the pages of Jinyong and the Dao De Ching, and in my wife's language, and now, sort of shared festivities around the Chinese New Year. So this time of year, as I'm recording this, it's actually the day after Chinese New Year. And, these sort of things really ground our family and our, collective beliefs. So when I read last week that 6,000 CEOs can't figure out how to be productive with artificial intelligence, and an economist from 1987 basically predicted this exact phenomena, my first thought wasn't actually about technology as much as I love the technology. My first thought is actually something a Chinese philosopher wrote 2,500 years ago, and something my uncle has been telling me about my entire life. So I'll get into some of the numbers because I think it's really interesting, and that we're talking really interesting numbers actually. Fortune ran a story last week, which is kind of where this all kicked off, and 6,000 CEOs. That's a lot of CEOs across a lot of different types of companies. Um, Basically said uniformly, like 90%, that AI has had no meaningful impact on their productivity. $250 billion invested globally. Now, I think that number's understated. I would hazard a guess that we're well in the trillions invested globally, especially if we talk about actual core infrastructure. And the average worker, according to this survey, uses AI about 90 minutes a week. Now, I think these numbers are probably dated and they're dating fast, but for all intents and purposes, that's not very much. So the average worker in the average, white collar job is just not utilizing AI, or at least not to any great extent. And then they dug up this incredible quote from an economist called Robert Solow, who said back in 1987, so when I was 6, that you can see the computer age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics. In other words, you see it everywhere in your day to day life and you hear about it and it's in the news and all those things, but the statistics actually say that it's not doing much, which is just a really beautiful quote. There's something almost comical about it, and the fact that the most powerful technology that we have ever created as a species is here now. It's changing every day, and yet for some reason we can't figure out how to get anything done with it. Billions, if not trillions, in investment. Lots of breathless keynotes, entire industries restructured. And when you survey the people that actually run those industries, 9 out of 10 of them just shrug it off as no big deal. Now, the philosopher I want to talk to today, his name is Lao Tzu. And some of you definitely heard that name before. And he spent about 81 short chapters, very short chapters, very poetic chapters, explaining why the logic is completely upside down. So the Dao De Jing is one of those texts that sounds super simple until you try to live it. Now, of course, the English translation is probably a little bit different to the original scripts, but for all intents and purposes, it's a very simple, it's quite a short read, and on the surface, basic advice. But when you try to live it, it's incredibly complicated. In chapter 48, there's this one verse that I keep coming back to, and I just want to read it slowly to you because I think it's worth percolating on, particularly as it pertains to what's happening now. In pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In pursuit of Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less do you need to force things until finally you arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. If you read that in the context of AI adoption, everyday organizations acquire new tools, new plugins, new skills, new agents, new workflows, you name it. Like it's endless. They're in a relentless pursuit of learning, and I am most certainly guilty of that. This is my hobby. In an endless pursuit of accumulation, and the more they accumulate, the less that actually gets done. Lao Tzu's suggestion runs against every instinct in the tech industry. He's saying, drop things. Simplify. Arrive at a point where you're not forcing anything. And then paradoxically, everything will just get done. This is Wu Wei, usually translated as something like non-action or inaction or effortless action, I guess. Though both translations, I think, kind of miss the point. Wu Wei isn't laziness, and I guess it can often be misconstrued as such. It's action that's so aligned with the actual situation that it doesn't feel like effort, if that makes sense. Think of a surfer, and I've got some friends that live up on the mid coast, so Newcastle sort of area, and into surfing and all those things. So that's kind of where I took inspiration for this. But anyway, enormous energy is moving through them when they're surfing, but they're not actually fighting it. They're not resisting the wave. They're flowing with the momentum of the energy of the wave. They're reading it, and they're shifting their weight just subconsciously without effort. I think chapter 37 puts it in a really interesting way, in that the Tao never does anything, yet through it, all things are done. Now, here's where things get interesting, at least in my humble opinion. The AI industry is actually adopting the language of Wu Wei. Let agents run overnight, automate your workflow, do nothing and wake up to completed work. Vibe code. It sounds like Lao Tzu, like his master, I guess, who does nothing yet leaves nothing undone on the surface. But there's a fundamental difference. Lao Tzu, so Lao Tzu's Wu Wei, comes from deep understanding. You've spent so long with a problem that solving flows through you. So the solution actually just flows through you. The AI version of Wu Wei comes from delegation. It's very different. So delegation without comprehension. You haven't understood the problem. You've just handed the process of that down the chain, right? So you've handed the process to someone that can do it faster than you can, in essence. And in chapter 47 of the Tao Te Ching it's almost eerie. So just listen to this. It's almost like a prediction of the future. Without going outside, you may not know the whole world. Without looking through the window, you may see the ways of heaven. The farther you go, the less you know. Every AI pitch deck in history, and I've delivered a few of these, is some version of go farther, no more, do everything. Lao Tzu says the opposite. The further you go, the less you actually know. The more you reach for, the less you can actually grasp. And here we are, racing farther than ever, knowing less than we expected. Okay, so with that, let's pivot a little bit to Hindu philosophy, which is something else I'm actually really fascinated by as well. Because there's a concept which describes what's happening in the AI industry better than anything else that I've read in any business magazine or any journal or any research paper. And, I read quite a lot and I write quite a lot. Hindu philosophy describes three gunas, three fundamental qualities that pervade everything in nature. And sattva is defined often as clarity or harmony or understanding. Rajas is passion, relentless, endless activity. And tamas, which is kind of like inertia, I guess, or darkness and stagnation. So a lack of inertia. Every person, every organization, every era has a dominant guna. And if you wanted to describe the AI industry in a single Sanskrit word, rajas is what that word would be. Like, I literally cannot find a better word to describe the era that we're currently in. Rajas is the energy of doing, of relentless busyness, of building, of launching, of scaling, of moving fast and breaking things. Like, in essence, that is what it is. And look, it's certainly not evil. It's never documented as like being this evil force, because at the end of the day, Rajas get shit done. But the wisdom traditions are unanimous on one main point, that Rajas without sattva lead you to nowhere, like across all the scriptures. And activity without clarity is frankly just noise. I'll let that percolate for a minute. So let me give you a couple of really concrete examples. There's an open source game engine called Godot. Now, I'm not a Godot developer. I'm an Unreal Engine developer. So I don't know it intimately enough to really talk at depth about the technology. But its maintainers recently came forward saying that they're drowning in AI-generated code contributions. Being an open source product, to be expected. People are using AI to produce pull requests, submitting them without any kind of review, and the maintainers literally can't keep up. So they're in a bit of a pickle. They can't always tell what was human written and what's AI generated, and I think there's actually solutions for that, but I digress. One of them said that I don't know how long we can keep it up. In other words, the proliferation of code that's being pushed and pulled into their open source repositories is drowning them as a business. More output, less value, pure Raja. Or look at the Guardian's new series on AI in the workplace. It's worth reading, actually. Silicon Valley's vibe has actually shifted. The optimism is thinning, which spells troubles ahead, economically speaking. An executive coach quoted in the piece said something along the lines of, "We've stopped talking about well-being. People are building faster than ever and feeling worse." In other words, the AI is making people more stressed out. And you kind of saw that coming. The more we're glued to our screens, the more that we're glued to our workplace, the more that we're constantly hyper focused on getting stuff done. It's probably not great for our mental health and our overall well-being and spirituality either. Automation hasn't reduced workloads. On the contrary, speaking for myself, automation has made things 10 times busier. Like, I am working incredible hours, both on my businesses, but also in the various other things that I do as well. But yeah, it has ultimately, I think, raised expectations, which is a kind of a topic for another time. You can do more, so the output has accelerated, and frankly, that means you probably should do more. So you must do more, and the treadmill keeps speeding up. Every single new model that's released, there is an expectation that you can deliver more and better and faster. So this is the rajasic trap playing out in real time. And the Bhagavad Gita warned about this thousands of years ago. Like, we're not talking about a document that was forecast like 20 years ago. This is thousands of years of history. And in chapter 14, it's described that the person dominated by rajas, restless, driven, always craving the fruits of action, never satisfied by what's been accomplished. It kind of reads like a job description for half of Silicon Valley. It's quite disturbing. The Gita also describes what sattva looks like. Sattva, or from sattva, knowledge is born. Bhagavad Gita, so chapter 14, verse 17, which is where I've taken this quote from. Pretty powerful. So from sattva, knowledge is born. Knowledge, understanding, clarity. Those don't come from doing more. They come from different quality of engagement entirely. So those 90% of CEOs who see no productivity gains from artificial intelligence, they're the ones running the rajasic implementations. More tools, more activity, more dashboards, more agents. The 10% who are seeing the real results, I'm seeing real results in what I'm doing with artificial intelligence. I'd wager they started with clarity about what they actually needed and what they wanted to get done. They didn't add AI to everything because they could. They added it to the right things and they dumped the rest. That's sattva. And it looks a lot like what's in chapter 48. There's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita that I actually think about almost every day. And I mean that actually quite literally. Like, nearly every single day I think about this. You have the right to perform your prescribed duties, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your actions. I'll read that one more time because I think it's really, really important. You have the right to perform your prescribed duties, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your actions. Krishna says this to Arjuna on a battlefield of all places. Arjuna is paralyzed by the weight of what he has to do. And Krishna's advice is essentially, do the work. Do it fully to the best of your ability, but let go of your grip on the outcome. This is nishkama karma. Action without attachment to results. And I I reckon it might be the healthiest possible relationship you could have with artificial intelligence. Think about what happens when people attach their identity to artificial intelligence's output. If you've been on LinkedIn recently, you know what I'm talking about. A student, for example, I work in the higher ed sector. So a student submits AI generated work and calls it their own. It's happening on every assignment. I've read more than my fair share as a lecturer. A developer ships AI written code without actually understanding what it does or how it works or the dependencies that it relies on, what it's built on from a licensing perspective. They got literally no idea. A writer publishes an AI drafted content and takes the byline, basically taking complete ownership and saying, that's what I wrote. I mean, it's totally fine, I think, to use AI to help you do research, but using the output as is and just throwing it up somewhere is, to me, this case in point. In each one of these cases, the attachment is to the fruit, okay, to the fruit, the thing, the output. The result, the appearance of having done something, that's what you're attached to. So Krishna would say that attachment is the problem. Use the tool, absolutely use the tool, let it assist you with work. But the moment you confuse its output with your accomplishment, you've lost something really important. You've mistaken the fruit for the action. And the fortune data tells this story in aggregate, I guess is the right word. Organizations adopt AI attached to the outcomes. They wanted productivity numbers. They wanted efficiency gains. They wanted the fruits. And the fruits haven't come, at least not statistically. So they're confused and they're disappointed. And, you can imagine some very difficult conversations that are happening right now. Nishkama Karma suggested a different approach, which is worth thinking about at least. Use AI because the work benefits from it. Use it with full attention and care. Then release your grip on the metrics. Now, I know that sounds totally impractical for many. It sounds like something a monk would say, but I actually think it's the most practical advice available, and it's something that I'm definitely subscribing to. The people I know who use AI well aren't obsessed with their productivity stats. That's totally not the point. They're absorbed in the work itself. The tool vanishes. It disappears. It becomes part of the flow. The way a good pen disappears. Like if you've got a really nice pen that you like writing with, and I love writing all of my notes and everything by hand still, even as a technology person, a good pen just disappears. They're not counting words per minute. They're just writing. Okay, so I'm pivoting back to China again, and specifically the Ming dynasty, to a philosopher called Wang Yangming. He had an idea that demolished the intellectual establishment at the time. Kind of my hero, I guess, because I think we need the same thing to happen right now. He called it the unity of knowledge and action. And his claim was super simple and yet incredibly radical. You don't truly know something unless you act on it. Knowledge without action isn't knowledge at all. It's just information. And his most well-known example was filial piety. And he believed you can study every Confucian text on how to honor your parents. You can recite them perfectly. But if you don't actually care for your parents, you don't know it. You just know the words about it. Now, think about that in the context of artificial intelligence and large language models and blah, 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 blah. An LLM knows everything about swimming. Again, I just pulled that out of my ass. It's read every book. It's read every manual. It knows the Olympic coaches. It knows the times of every swimmer that's swum every single swimming event and style. It can explain the physics of water, hydrodynamics, I think is what it's called, breathing techniques, stroke techniques, all that fun stuff. And I know very little about swimming, but it's never been wet. Therefore, by Wang Yangming's standard, it knows nothing about swimming. And I think this distinction matters more than in most. And I think this distinction matters more than almost any technical debate about artificial intelligence, about artificial intelligent capabilities. We've confused the accumulation of information with the development of understanding. And I'll say that again because I fumbled on the word development. We've confused the accumulation of information with the development of understanding. They're related, absolutely, sure, certainly, but they're entirely different things. Buddhism draws a similar line. That two truths doctrine, it's actually really hard to say, distinguishes between conventional truth, which is how things appear, what can be said, the realm of concepts and categories, and ultimate truth, which is how things actually are, the realm of direct experience. AI operates entirely at the level of conventional truth. It describes ultimate truth beautifully. It's read every Buddhist text there is. It knows no bounds when it comes to the scriptures. You know, everything that's up there on the internet has been scraped, but it has no access to the thing those texts point towards. And the Buddha had this beautiful parable of the raft. His teachings, he said, are kind of like a raft. You use them to cross the river. Once you've crossed the river, you leave the raft and you go onto the shore. You don't carry it on your head. AI is the most elaborate raft that we've ever constructed. It can ferry information across any river you point at it. The danger, however, the one that Buddha flagged 2,500 years ago, so 2,500 years ago, is that we start worshipping the raft. We add features. We argue about which raft is the best, and you're seeing this constantly now. And we forget that the whole point was to cross the river and just keep moving on. I see this everywhere in AI discourse. Endless comparison of models, benchmarks, context windows, tokens per second. The raft gets shinier every quarter. Meanwhile, the river is right there. And I've fallen into this trap as well. Like, I have my preferred models and things that I use. Of course I do. But never lose sight of the river and the crossing therein. Right. So here's what interests me the most about that fortune data. 90% see no productivity gains. The average employee uses AI 90 minutes a week. But there's a 10% who have integrated it deeply, and the article suggests that they're pulling ahead really, really fast. So what's the difference about that 10%? I don't think they're smarter. I don't think that they have better tools. We all have access to the same tools. I think they have better clarity about what work actually matters. The Dao De Jing in chapter 57 states that the more prohibitions you have, the less virtuous people will be. The more weapons you have, the less secure people will be. The more subsidies you have, the less self-reliant people will be. Lao Tzu, in describing a pattern, more intervention, less of the thing you wanted, more productivity tools, less productivity, Sound familiar? More communication platforms, less communication. More project management software and project management documentation. More meetings about project management. Oh, that one resonates hard. Sound familiar to you? The 10% broke this pattern. They didn't add AI to their existing chaos. They used AI in an occasion to simplify, to ask, what am I actually trying to do here? What can I drop? What can I drop? What can I get rid of? What are the things that I can just outsource so I can focus? So chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching. This is one of my favorites. This is a cracker. We join spokes together, and you've probably heard this one. This one's pretty well known. It often gets used. But anyway, we join spokes together in a wheel, but it's the center hole that makes the wagon move. We shape clay into a pot, but is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. We hammer wood for a house, but it's actually the inner space that makes it livable. The usefulness is in the emptiness, the space, the things that got removed. So I think that the 10% understood this intuitively. They didn't fill their days with AI-generated activity and slop. They used AI to create space. Space to think, space to do the work that only they as a human could do, space to be present with the problem instead of drowning in output. The 90% filled the space with more stuff, more content, more LinkedIn posts, more documents, more drafts, more emails, more reports. Raja's activity. Going back to Raja, the treadmill is at high speed and higher speed and higher speed. You know what? Now that I actually think about it while I'm recording this video in real time and I'm sort of winging it, I wonder if Tao is actually flow state. Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist, described flow state as merging of action and awareness. Basically, the self disappears, time distorts, evaporates, becomes sort of non-existent. Effort drops away, and the work just moves through you. That's flow state in the classical sense. If I read chapter 48 of the Tao Te Ching again with that lens of flow state, less and less do you need to force things until finally you arrive at non-action. Sounds a lot like flow. That's like an exact definition of flow. And Zhuangzi, who was Lao Tzu's successor, I guess, philosophical successor, made this explicit in that his famous story of Kukding describes a butcher. And the butcher was carving an ox, like, perfectly, just effortlessly. His knife just would never dull. It would just be perfect. He'd never have to sharpen his knife. It was just seamless. And he doesn't cut through the sinew. He doesn't cut through the bone. He just effortlessly finds spaces between the different parts. He moves with the structure of the animal, not against the structure of the animal. And then someone asks him, well, how do you do that? And the butcher responds that I've given up perception and understanding and just let my spirit move where it wants. And that really is flow state, described 2,300-ish years ago, before Western psychology gave it a name. And maybe this is the difference between the 10% and the 90%. The 10% aren't using artificial intelligence to produce more. They're using it to free themselves up to enter flow state more often. The tool disappears. The space opens up, the work moves through them the way Cook Ding's knife moves through the ox, finding the gaps, flowing through the grain, and not applying unnecessary force. The 90% are still hacking at the bone. Makes a lot of sense when I think about it like that. So, where does this leave us? I kind of want to be careful here because the obvious conclusion is reject artificial intelligence and go live in a monastery. And as appealing as that sometimes sounds, that's not what any of these traditions actually teach. The Buddha prescribed the middle way, basically avoiding the extremes. It's kind of like dieting, right? Don't indulge in every pleasure and don't renounce the world entirely. Somewhere in the middle is the right place. And when you apply that to artificial intelligence, the middle way looks something like this. Use the tools. They're incredibly powerful and they're here, so why not? But use them with presence, with clarity about what you're actually trying to do and why. Don't worship them as the answer to everything. Don't fear them as the end of everything. They're tools, admittedly extraordinarily sophisticated tools, but ultimately they're still tools, right? The Tao Te Ching in chapter 29 asks, do you want to improve the world? I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. It can't be improved. If you tamper with it, you'll ruin it. If you treat it like an object, you'll lose it. There's something in there for AI. There's something in there for the AI will fix everything crowd. And also for the AI will destroy everything crowd alike. The world is sacred. It doesn't need improving in the way that we think. And treating it or the people in it as objects to be optimized is how you lose the plot entirely. I keep coming back to a fundamental irony here. We built the most powerful productivity tool in human history, and we can't even figure out how to be productive with it. Lao Tzu would have smiled at that. Of course you can't. You were never going to force it. The more you push, the more it recedes. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. The question I am left with, the one I honestly don't have an answer to, is this. In a world that rewards activity and measures output and funds velocity, is there any room left for the kind of knowing that only comes from stillness? Because the ancient traditions are unanimous on this point. The deepest understanding doesn't come from doing more. It comes from a quality of attention that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten how to cultivate. And AI, for all of its brilliance, and I love AI, can't cultivate it for us. Thanks for watching. This is the first in a series I'm calling Ancient Wisdom for the world of artificial intelligence. Next time, we're going to go a little bit deeper, I think, into knowledge versus understanding and why large language models that read every book still don't know how to swim. I'll see you then.